The sudden tremor shook the very core of the galaxy. Rhea stared at the blinking red alert flashing on her screen, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the console. "This can't be real," she muttered to herself, the urgency of the moment sinking in. The cosmic rift, an anomaly beyond comprehension, had emerged unexpectedly. Her heart raced as the ramifications of the event began to unfold. She could feel the weight of history bearing down on her, a silent pressure that no one could prepare for. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse, yet no one could fully understand what they were facing. Rhea knew one thing for certain: she was the only one with the knowledge to understand the implications, but even her expertise couldn't prepare her for what was to come. The rift was growing, and time was running out. As her team scrambled to assess the situation, Rhea fought to calm her swirling thoughts, determined to take charge despite the storm inside her. "We need to move now," she finally said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of uncertainty. "We can't afford to wait." Her mind raced as she calculated the next steps. There was no clear answer, no manual on how to navigate this. But if they didn't act quickly, the rift could tear apart everything they had fought for. The lives of billions were at stake. It was up to Rhea now, and she would not fail. As Rhea stood before the crew, the weight of the decision pressed on her. The rift was growing, its swirling energy expanding and pulling everything around it. "We don't have much time," Rhea said, her voice steady but strained. "If we don't act now, the rift will be beyond our reach. We must find a way to stop it, or we risk losing everything." She turned to her crew, who were all deeply absorbed in their respective screens, trying to make sense of the data. Her eyes lingered on each one, silently pleading for answers. The team's faces reflected their own internal turmoil. They were experts in their fields, but none of them had faced a crisis like this before. Rhea's mind raced. She knew that the cosmic rift wasn't just a natural phenomenon. There was something more sinister at work. But she couldn't say it aloud, not yet. Instead, she focused on the mission, her responsibility to them all. The crew needed her leadership, and despite the fear clawing at her chest, she would not let them down. "We'll start by gathering as much information as we can from the rift's core. It may hold clues on how to close it." The words felt hollow, even to her, but she could see her crew nodding in agreement. For the first time in hours, they looked ready to move forward, even if they didn't fully understand what they were up against. Rhea's voice crackled through the comm system as she addressed the crew. "Prepare for launch. We need to get as close to the rift as possible to gather data. Once we're within range, I'll initiate the core sampling procedure." Her fingers hovered over the control panel, each button a decision that could lead them closer to the truth, or to their destruction. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling at the back of her mind. The rift was more than just an anomaly. It had an intelligence, a malevolent purpose that seemed to be pulling at the fabric of reality itself. Her thoughts were interrupted by a chime. A message from the hidden ally she had reached out to for advice. "Rhea." The voice came through softly, yet there was urgency in it. "I have information that might help, but it comes at a great cost." The words sent a chill through her. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the screen. The price was steep, but they had no choice. The rift wasn't waiting for anyone. "What's the cost?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The answer came as a warning. "You will need to make a sacrifice, someone close to you." The silence that followed was deafening. Rhea closed her eyes briefly, collecting her thoughts. She knew the gravity of the situation, but the cost of this mission might be more than she was willing to pay. Still, there was no turning back. The decision had been made. As the ship neared the edge of the rift's gravitational pull, the crew members braced themselves. Rhea's mind was focused, calculating every risk, but she knew the danger was inevitable. "Activate the core sampling protocol," she ordered. The ship's engines hummed as it slowly adjusted course, inching closer to the rift. It was like watching a storm cloud on the horizon, beautiful in its own terrifying way. Her heart raced as the ship broke through the rift's outer boundary, and the first images from the core began to filter through the system. The data they received was overwhelming. It wasn't just energy, it was a web of broken realities, a tear in the very fabric of space-time. The crew remained silent, their eyes fixed on the screen, processing the data that appeared in real time. Rhea turned away from the control panel for a brief moment, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She needed to keep it together for their sake. But even as the ship drew closer to the rift, she felt something far more sinister waiting. The rift wasn't just a threat, it was a weapon, and it had been built for something far more dangerous than they could understand. She needed to act quickly before it consumed them all. Rhea's thoughts raced as the crew continued to work, but a sudden unanticipated shift in the rift's energy caught their attention. "It's changing," one of the crew members muttered, her eyes wide with shock. Rhea's hands moved instinctively, adjusting the controls, trying to stabilize the ship's trajectory. "We've been detected," she said quietly. The cosmic rift wasn't just a passive anomaly. It had become aware of their presence. It pulsed, its dark energy rippling like a sentient force, as though it was watching them. Panic rippled through the crew, but Rhea's calm presence steadied them. "Hold steady," she commanded. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay focused. The rift's pull was getting stronger, the ship shaking with each pulse. They had entered too far into its core. The data was important, but now it was a matter of survival. She knew what had to be done. "Prepare for a jump to full speed," Rhea ordered. "We're getting out of here now." The crew quickly moved into action, but the pressure on Rhea was immense. She had led them into this, and now she had to lead them out before it was too late. Rhea sat in the dimly lit control room, staring at the ever-expanding rift on the holographic display. It had been days since they had narrowly escaped its grasp, but now, the rift seemed more dangerous, more deliberate. "This doesn't feel like a natural phenomenon," she muttered. The more they studied it, the more she was convinced that someone or something was controlling the rift. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the fragmented data they had collected. "It's like the rift is alive," she said, her voice barely audible to the crew around her. She turned to the team, each one of them exhausted but determined. The moral confidant, a wise older scientist, looked up from his terminal, his eyes filled with concern. "Rhea, we may be dealing with something far beyond our understanding," he warned. "This rift may have been a weapon, not a phenomenon." The air in the room grew heavy, and a cold chill ran down Rhea's spine. They were walking on the edge of something ancient and dark. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being manipulated, that they were being led towards something catastrophic. "We need to understand its origin, but I fear we may be too late," Rhea replied, trying to steady her voice. As she stared at the rift, she realized that they were now caught in a web of forces they could not comprehend. Their only choice was to dive deeper, hoping they wouldn't be consumed by it. The crew worked tirelessly, analyzing every bit of data they had on the rift, but Rhea could feel the tension mounting. They were no closer to understanding its purpose or how to stop it. "Rhea," the moral confidant said softly, breaking her concentration. She looked up, meeting his gaze. He was older, his face lined with years of experience, but there was something unsettling in his eyes now. "I've been digging through old archives. There's something unsettling I need to show you." The scientist led her to another terminal, where a faded hologram flickered to life. It showed an ancient map, with a strange symbol marking the center of the rift's current location. "This symbol, it's from a lost civilization," he explained. "They were said to possess a power capable of bending space and time itself. If the rift is tied to them, it could be a weapon, one capable of altering the very fabric of reality." Rhea's mind raced. "We need to find more. This could be the key to stopping it." But as the words left her mouth, she realized something. If they were too late, it wouldn't just be the rift they had to worry about. It would be the force that created it. As Rhea walked through the ship's narrow corridors, she could feel the weight of the decision ahead. She knew that they needed more than just data to stop the rift. They needed a plan, and quickly. She stopped in front of the small briefing room, where her crew gathered. "We're not just dealing with a rift," she said, her voice rising. "We're dealing with a weapon. And unless we stop it, it could tear apart everything in its path." The crew was silent, their eyes wide, absorbing the gravity of her words. The betrayer, a young man in his 30s with dark hair and a sharp jawline, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes met Rhea's, and she could tell that he wasn't fully on board with the plan. "What exactly are we supposed to do about it?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Rhea stared him down, her voice steady. "We're going to go to the heart of it. We'll find a way to shut it down before it consumes us all." The tension in the room thickened, but Rhea's confidence began to settle the crew's nerves. They didn't have a choice. This was the only option left. "Prepare yourselves," she added. "We leave at dawn." Wingnarm. 1. Rhea's crew braced themselves as the ship approached the heart of the rift. The closer they got, the more intense the gravitational pull became, causing the ship to shudder. "We're entering the rift's core," Rhea said, her voice tight with concentration. The crew scrambled to monitor the ship's systems, keeping track of the sudden fluctuations in the rift's energy. "There's no going back now," Rhea added. She watched as the rift's energy began to warp the fabric of space around them, distorting stars and bending light. The ship's hull groaned, and Rhea could hear the creaking of the metal as it fought to stay intact. Suddenly, the power systems flickered, and an alarm blared. "Engines are failing," one of the crew members shouted. The ship lurched violently, and Rhea had to grip the console to keep her balance. "Stay focused," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. She didn't have time to think about the mounting fear. They had come too far to turn back. The rift was closing in around them. They had no choice but to push forward. As the ship drifted deeper into the rift's core, Rhea felt the weight of the mission bearing down on her. Every decision she made seemed to carry irreversible consequences. "We're running out of time," the betrayer said quietly, breaking the silence. Rhea turned toward him, meeting his gaze. There was a glint of something in his eyes, a look that unsettled her. "I've been thinking," he continued, his voice low. "We may be going about this the wrong way." Rhea's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone firm. "I think we should work with the rift," he said, his voice steady yet cold. "We can control it. We can use its power." The room fell silent. Rhea could feel the betrayal coming, the weight of his words sinking in. The rift wasn't just a threat to be stopped. It was a tool. A dangerous, powerful tool. "That's not why we're here," Rhea said, her voice hard as steel. "You're wrong." But she knew he was right about one thing. They couldn't defeat the rift alone. The question now was, what price were they willing to pay to survive? The ship's hull groaned as it approached the heart of the rift, its surface shaking under the immense gravitational forces. Rhea stood at the command console, her eyes fixed on the glowing mass of the rift. The crew had been silent for hours, each of them aware of the looming threat. "We're about to enter the unknown," Rhea murmured. "Brace yourselves." The view outside the viewport was nothing short of terrifying. Vast tendrils of energy spiraled out from the rift, distorting the stars and bending space itself. The ship's instruments flickered, struggling to maintain their accuracy under the rift's influence. "We have no idea what we're up against," said the betrayer, his voice low and tense. Rhea turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "Then we'll find out," she replied. Despite the unease that gripped her, there was a surge of determination inside her. If they were to stop the rift, they had no choice but to face it head-on. But as the ship neared the rift's core, Rhea felt an overwhelming sense of dread. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a force that had existed long before them, and it had a purpose they couldn't yet comprehend. As the ship shuddered, Rhea steeled herself. "Get ready. We don't know what's coming, but we're going to face it together." The ship continued its descent into the rift, the darkness outside swallowing them whole. Rhea's heart raced as she watched the glowing energy of the rift grow larger, more chaotic. Suddenly, the instruments went wild, flashing warnings and triggering alarms. "We're losing control," shouted one of the crew members, a young woman in her late 20s, her face pale with fear. Rhea's eyes darted between the monitors, trying to make sense of the data. The rift was destabilizing their systems, causing the ship to veer off course. "Hold it together," Rhea shouted over the growing panic. The betrayer stood up, his voice shaking. We need to leave now, he urged. Rhea shot him a cold look, her grip tightening on the console. We're not leaving, she said firmly. Not yet. We've come this far and we're going to see this through. The rift had already begun to pull at the fabric of space, and Rhea knew that if they didn't act quickly, they would be lost to its power. She made a snap decision. Prepare for manual override. With a loud thud, the ship lurched violently as the rift's energy tore at the ship's systems. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the crew staggered as the ship shook. We're going to hit it! One of the crew members yelled, panic rising in their voice. Rhea's grip tightened on the console as the ship continued to spiral toward the heart of the rift. We're too close, the betrayer cried out. Rhea's mind raced, but there was only one choice left. Prepare for impact, she commanded. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The sound of the ship's hull groaning against the rift's pull filled the air as the instruments flickered and failed. We won't survive this if we don't. The rest of his words were lost in the screeching metal as the ship collided with the rift's core. Rhea's eyes narrowed, her face grim. She had led them into this, and now she had to see them through. Despite the chaos surrounding her, she knew there was one thing they had to do: survive. The ship was now inside the rift's core, surrounded by an inky void where the laws of physics no longer applied. Rhea stood at the center of the bridge, her mind reeling as she processed the ship's dire situation. What the hell is this? One of the crew members muttered, his eyes wide in disbelief. The rift had completely warped the space around them, leaving the ship trapped in a vast, dark void. It's not just a rift, Rhea said quietly, her voice distant. It's a prison, and we're its prisoners. The crew exchanged nervous glances, each one realizing the weight of her words. The ship's systems were malfunctioning, and they had no clear way out. We need to figure out how to disable this thing, Rhea continued, her voice firm once again. But we can't do it alone. We need to trust each other now more than ever. Her eyes moved over the crew, each of them silently acknowledging the severity of the situation. It was no longer just about survival. It was about finding a way to fight back. But how? As the ship drifted deeper into the heart of the rift, Rhea could feel her resolve hardening. They were running out of time, and every decision she made could be their last. We need to find a way to break free from the rift's grip, she said, her voice calm but urgent. There has to be a weakness in its structure, something we can exploit. The crew was focused on their tasks, working to reroute power and stabilize the ship. The betrayer walked over to Rhea, his face serious. I think I know how we can break free, he said quietly. But it's risky. We'll need to overload the ship's power systems, creating a burst strong enough to force us out. Rhea turned to him, her expression skeptical. And how do we survive that? She asked. The betrayer gave her a sharp look. We don't, but it might give the ship a chance to escape. Rhea's mind raced. She didn't want to sacrifice the ship, or the crew, but this might be their only shot. Do it, she ordered. Rhea's eyes widened as the ancient alien artifact activated, its glow intensifying with every passing second. The energy within the rift seemed to respond, pulsing in rhythm with the artifact's activation. What have we done? She whispered. The ship shook as the rift's power swirled violently around them. Their plan to use the artifact to close the rift had inadvertently intensified it. We've triggered something we can't control, said the moral confidant, fear in his voice. Rhea clenched her fists. She had no choice but to try and stop it before the galaxy was consumed. No, galaxy was consumed. Rhea, the artifact is causing a feedback loop with the rift, the scientist said, struggling to make sense of the data. It's amplifying the rift's energy, not stopping it. Panic rippled through the crew as the ship's power fluctuated. We have to shut it down, Rhea said, her voice firm. But the artifact had bonded with the rift's energy. We can't. It's too late, the betrayer interjected, his tone colder than before. Rhea hesitated but knew they had no choice but to push forward, hoping for a miracle. The ship jolted violently as the feedback loop intensified. "We're losing control," shouted a crew member, frantically working the controls. Rhea's mind raced. They were caught in an impossible situation. "We need to force the ship into the rift's core," she ordered. "It's the only way to neutralize the feedback." The betrayer's eyes flickered with hesitation. "You're asking us to sacrifice the ship," he protested. "If we don't do it now, we'll lose everything," Rhea replied coldly. She knew it was the only chance they had left. The ship lurched forward, plummeting toward the rift's center. "Engage the override," Rhea commanded, her voice steady despite the panic surrounding her. The crew scrambled to execute her order, each second feeling like an eternity. "This is it," said the moral confidant, his voice filled with resignation. The ship's systems groaned as they fought against the rift's pull. "We can't afford to fail," Rhea muttered under her breath, her eyes locked on the rift's heart. She knew the fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. The ship was now within the rift's core, suspended in a surreal void. "We've done it," Rhea said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. But the relief was short-lived. The rift's energy surged, becoming more erratic and dangerous. "The rift is destabilizing," the betrayer warned, his eyes wide with fear. Rhea clenched her fists. "We have to keep it together, we're not out of danger yet." The ship was falling apart under the pressure, but Rhea knew there was one final gamble left to play. As the ship continued to spiral within the rift's core, the energy levels spiked once more. Rhea stood at the helm, her face drawn with exhaustion but determined. "We can't keep this up," one of the crew members shouted, but Rhea's gaze never wavered. "We have no choice," she replied firmly. "This is it. If we don't shut it down now, the rift will consume everything." The ship's systems were nearly at critical mass, but they had no other option. The crew was giving it their all, but Rhea knew the moment of truth had arrived. "The rift's energy is off the charts," said the betrayer, his voice shaky. "If we don't find a way to reverse the polarity, we'll be pulled into the event horizon." Rhea's thoughts raced. "Do it," she commanded. She could feel the weight of their actions, but she had no other choice. The betrayer hesitated, then moved to engage the ship's emergency systems. "This will overload everything," he warned. Rhea turned to face him, her eyes hard. "Do it now. We don't have much time." As the energy levels continued to rise, Rhea gave the command. "We're going to overload the engines. Prepare for everything to go dark." The crew held their breath, knowing the gravity of the situation. The ship's power systems groaned as they reached their maximum output. "We can't afford to hesitate," Rhea said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Do it now." The room was silent as the crew executed her command, praying it would work. As the countdown began, the ship trembled under the immense strain of the overload. "The systems are failing," one of the crew shouted. "We won't make it if we don't shut this off." Rhea's heart pounded as she watched the seconds tick down. "This is the only way," she said, her voice firm. The ship's core hummed with the energy of the rift, each passing second feeling like a lifetime. They were all in this together, but only one could emerge from the chaos. The ship shook one final time, the rift's energy at its peak. "Caw." Rhea looked out the viewport, her breath held in her chest. "We did it," she whispered. The rift's energy began to fade, collapsing inward. But as the ship slowly drifted away, Rhea knew this wasn't the end. The rift had been sealed, but the cost was more than they had bargained for. The galaxy was safe, for now. But what would the future hold? As the ship emerged from the rift's collapse, Rhea felt the weight of their survival settle over her. The crew was silent, each one processing what they had just endured. "We've made it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we're not out of danger yet." The rift's destruction had caused ripples throughout space, and they had no idea what would come next. "We need to regroup," Rhea continued. "The galaxy will need our help." The crew nodded in agreement, their eyes still haunted by the chaos they had witnessed. "Rhea, there's something on the scanners," a crew member said urgently, her voice cutting through the silence. Rhea turned quickly, her instincts immediately kicking in. What is it? The scanner blinked with a warning. Another anomaly, not far from their location. We've been through enough, Rhea said, her voice firm. Prepare the ship, we're heading there now. The thought of facing another unknown threat sent a chill through the crew, but they had no choice. The galaxy's fate was still in their hands. As they neared the anomaly, Rhea felt the ship shake once more, a tremor from deep within space. Brace for impact, she shouted. The crew scrambled, securing their stations. We're entering uncharted territory, Rhea warned. The lights flickered as the ship moved deeper into the anomaly. This could be the beginning of something even worse, said the betrayer, his voice tinged with fear. Rhea stood at the helm, her grip firm. Then we stop it before it consumes us too. We're not going to make it, a crew member screamed as the ship was pulled into the heart of the anomaly. Rhea's mind raced. We will make it, hold steady. The ship bucked and twisted under the force, but Rhea refused to let it break her resolve. We need to stabilize the ship's core. Now, she ordered. The crew worked together in a frantic rush, each second critical. We're losing power, another member shouted, but Rhea's voice was unwavering. We fight, or we die. With a final desperate push, the crew managed to stabilize the ship's systems. The anomaly's energy began to dissipate. Rhea breathed a sigh of relief, but the silence that followed felt unnatural. We did it, she said quietly, but she knew their journey was far from over. The galaxy still lay in tatters, and they were the only ones who could repair the damage. Let's go home, Rhea added, but her words carried the weight of a new beginning, not an ending. The ship's engines hummed quietly as it cruised through the galaxy, its course now set for a distant star system. We've survived the impossible, Rhea said, her voice filled with quiet pride. But the galaxy will need us more than ever. Her crew sat in the background, the weight of their journey still pressing on their shoulders. We've made it this far, Rhea continued. Now we rebuild, one step at a time. As the ship approached the new star system, Rhea's mind turned to the future. We've got a long road ahead, she said, her voice steady. The crew had proven their strength, but Rhea knew there would be more battles to fight. We can't do this alone, she continued. We need allies, and we need to build a new future for the galaxy. She turned to her crew, each of them nodding in agreement. The galaxy's survival depended on their unity. As the ship entered the new star system, the crew began preparations to establish a new base. We'll need resources, allies, and time, Rhea said, strategizing for the next phase. But we have one advantage: hope. The crew worked tirelessly, setting up communication systems and scanning the nearby planets for potential allies. This is where we start over, Rhea said, a determined smile on her face. The galaxy's future would no longer be shaped by fear, but by their actions. As Rhea looked at the crew, a sense of unity filled her heart. We faced the darkest of times and survived, she said. Now we can face anything together. The crew stood around her, stronger for the trials they had endured. This is our chance to rebuild, she continued. We do it for the galaxy, for everyone who believed in us. The ship's course was set, and the journey forward was clear. They would make a new home, a safe haven for those who needed it most. The ship soared through the new star system, its crew united in purpose. Rhea gazed out the viewport, her heart full of hope. We've done it, she said softly. The galaxy is ours to protect, to rebuild. She turned to face the crew. But this is just the beginning. Together we will ensure that this galaxy, our galaxy, never falls into darkness again. And as they sailed toward the unknown, Rhea knew their fight had only just begun.